All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. And what is the biggest thing we can talk about? It's life. It's life and it's death. Now, my guest today is someone that I met a number of years ago when we were both volunteering for a nonprofit called American Dream U, which helps soldiers in their transition from uh, military life into civilian life to try to figure out how to find jobs, how to create the life that they want to have to continue the life of service after service. And I was lined up to speak at this event with my friend Josh Mantz, who was killed. You heard that right. He was shot and killed on the battlefield in Iraq. He flatlined for 15 full minutes and was brought back to life through the heroic actions of medics who made really smart choices all around him. And when I was first asked to speak at this event, the organizer said, okay, so here's who's going to speak. It's going to be the COO of Starbucks Japan. It's going to be a vet who helps with homeless vets, women homeless vets after they come back from service. It's this guy who died, and then it'll be you. And I was like, dude, you can't have me go last. I'm a pretty decent speaker, but I can't follow the dead guy. Okay. Like, he's got to close the show. So I know today this is going to be a moment in time that is going to just close out your week so well. It is going to be something that you really want to pay attention to. So welcome, Josh. I am so glad, so honored, so privileged to be your friend and to have you here today to talk about those moments and what you learned and what you've learned since. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here, Laura, and it's good to see you again as always. It's been a while since Japan, hasn't it?
It has been a while since Japan. Yes. It that was that was it was quite an interesting few days where it was like a collision of people who were coming to this idea of service and working with these members of the military, soon to be veterans from sort of all over the map, and each one of us, I think, brought a different view of life and what it was all about. But you walked in, and I've never spoken to a military audience before, and I had a pretty hard time because they just sit there sort of bolt upright, taking in information, staring daggers at you. And I was like, oh my God, I'm flailing left and right. And they came up to me afterwards. They're like, I learned this and I learned this and I learned this, and it was great. And I was like, I don't understand. But you got up there and you spoke, and it was like every single person in the room just leaned forward. You could hear a pin drop. So I want you to talk to us about that moment. I want to start with the moment where you were shot. And I want to talk a little bit about what that was like in the moments leading up to taking your last breath.
Yeah.
So take us into that day in Iraq.
Well, that was so kind of for context, which I think is really important, just because this was such a significant event for all of us. Is I was a freshman at West Point when 9/11 happened. So I was a graduating member of the class of 9/11, right? Which has kind of become this symbolic class of that time. And by the time I was about 23, I was deployed to northeastern Baghdad, which I know you and I have talked about this many different times, but this was not a conventional war. It is not the type of war that people tend to think of when they think of combat. I served in the most violent area of Baghdad at one of the most violent times of the entire war, and I never fired my weapon as an infantry officer, right? It's not that it's just the dynamics of this situation, because it's a heavily and dense urban environment. Everything comes down to building trust and relationships. I placed a very heavy emphasis on relationship building, and to do that in a foreign culture where people have the perception of not liking you at first. You've got to be able to break that barrier down. So that's actually why I majored in Arabic at West Point. It wasn't to, it was really because I knew I was going to be in the Middle East, and that language is the most powerful weapon in the world. So that day, after a couple months of work, we were running a humanitarian patrol up near Sadr City, which some of your guests may have heard of that name, right? It's a very rough spot in Baghdad, and we were trying to establish a foothold out there and see what could happen. So I was delivering some shirts and food and water and stuff like that, just kind of seeing what the local people needed. And I'm pretty certain we were talking with insurgents that day. But that's kind of what you have to do sometimes. That humanitarian patrol went really well. It was a joint patrol, the first one we were able to pull off with the Iraqi police. And just to give you an idea, like, I've seen countries that don't have credible police forces. Like, and there's no security, there's no stability. Like the police that we were working with over there were all, many of them were corrupt. They were untrained, right? We were starting from ground zero. They did not want to go out on patrol because it was too dangerous for them.
Wow.
Right? The chief of police told me that. He was like, we can't go up there. It's too dangerous. So we were really starting at that kind of level, and it's a very scary feeling to not have a quality police force. But nonetheless, we did that relationship building patrol, and during the middle of that, we actually got diverted to another part of our sector by our battalion headquarters. There was a unit that was passing through another part of the sector a couple miles away that was engaged by a rocket-propelled grenade by an insurgent. The rocket missed, nobody was hurt, but we were sent over there to kind of investigate, to see what happened. And while we were over there, we saw a suspicious vehicle driving very slowly around just a block or two away. And that's kind of a sign that it could be an insurgent trying to videotape us in terms of trying to understand our tactics or use it as propaganda. So we stopped that car and went over to investigate the situation. And it was just me and Staff Sergeant Marlon Harper on the ground, my senior non-commissioned officer. And when I got over there to the driver's window, it didn't make sense. It did not feel like an insurgent. Older gentleman, kind of shaking, seemed very scared, which from a different standpoint, that could have also been a sign that something was about to go down. So it didn't seem like an insurgent at first. That wasn't my first thought. And I look in the back seat, though, and sure enough, I see probably what's a $5,000 video camera just laying openly in the back seat. So right there, we had probable cause to detain this person just with that, right? Nothing bad would have happened. We would have taken him in for questioning. If he was innocent, we would have dropped him back off. But instead, I didn't feel right about that. I wanted to, again, this is all about relationship building and trust.
Right.
So I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt despite the risk, and wanted to see if I could get a playback function on that video camera to see if he was taping us. And simultaneously, I decided to do an explosives test on his fingers, which only takes about a minute, right? It's exactly what you'll get going through TSA when they swipe something in your suitcase.
Right.
So I took that extra 30 to 60 seconds, and my senior non-commissioned officer, Marlon Harper, was the one that was conducting that test. He fully agreed with doing it. And it was while he was fixed in place conducting that test that we were shot. And it was, this was one bullet. It was a massive bullet. It was not a regular sniper rifle. It was an anti-aircraft weapon that a very professional team of insurgents, likely coming in from outside of the sector to conduct this attack, because of the level of tactical ability that they displayed. It was a very, very well executed attack. But one bullet, it went through Marlon's left arm, exited out of his chest, severing his aorta, and then it ricocheted into my upper right thigh and severed my femoral artery. After that, there's a variety of different ways I could take this, but I went through a multitude of what I've been studying for the last 3 years, kind of because of this, has been consciousness, right? So there was a progression of a variety of different altered states of consciousness throughout the next couple minutes, basically until I died. But when I first got shot, It felt like everything shifted to slow motion, which is kind of one of the common altered states of consciousness that people experience in high threat scenarios like this. The body's fight, flight, freeze response is activated, right? So slow motion time, fast motion time, auditory distortion in that I could only hear the muted sound of the sniper rifle, my own voice calling for a medic. Altered states of vision. The very next thing that after I kind of felt the concussion of that bullet, which kind of felt like being slowly picked up by the swell of an ocean wave in slow motion, right? As the body absorbs the shock. I look and, it was like hypervision on Marlon Harper's face. It was like a zoom in shot of his face. This kind of primal indication that something was horribly wrong, right? And one thing that I really try to get through to people, because it's hard to conceive this, right? But we got to understand that the rational mind, our ability to think, completely goes offline during these responses. So although I can describe everything later and I can kind of describe the way that I was feeling along this route, we got to remember that in real time, I didn't even know that I was shot. I didn't, things happen so fast, right? We're talking a 15-second window here of time.
And yet you still, like, when you've told me the story in the past, you've told me the story as seeing Marlon in slow motion crumple to the ground. Like, even though you don't know you're shot yet, but you feel the swell and you're seeing him, you see his face. Do you realize that he was killed immediately from that bullet before you realize you're shot?
I would say that the body knows, our bodies know, and our entire body is a sensor, right? And I think that there was a knowingness below the level of rational awareness, right? Conscious. There was a knowingness that my body took over. I was a passenger, right? Riding along in what's called this autonomic response, fight, flight, freeze. It's like when we get stung by a bee, that initial reaction, rationality goes offline. You're not thinking of what's happening, right? It's only a second later that you realize it was a bee.
Yes.
What I experienced because of the severity of this event was like a prolonged 15-second long autonomic response, which was kind of insane. And what you'll see is, and kind of what I train clinicians on and first responders and military folks in kind of understanding this, is just the complexity of how powerful our bodies are. Like my body shifted through all three of the autonomic responses, fight, flight, and freeze, during this single 15-second window, based on the changing variables in the environment at hand. Seeing Marlon fall to the ground, my body just automatically shifted to dragging him, right? So I drug him. I was calling on my radio. We have 2 casualties. I was out of breath. And I drug him to safety and started to perform medical assistance to him. And that's when I saw like just a huge gap, you're talking a $50 size wound right over the aorta, right? And that was just a moment of kind of freeze where it was shock, right? Traumatic loss. It was, I've never seen a wound quite like that before.
Because he was your friend. I mean, this wasn't just somebody who happened to be the guy you're serving with that day.
Well, it's what I would say is like, it's more, I actually only, so for the first part of the deployment, I was actually leading an infantry platoon. I had only kind of took over the command of that scout platoon for like 2 months. So I only knew these guys for about 2 months.
Is that like dog years?
But yeah, it is in combat in those. I mean, within a week we felt like brothers, right? But yeah. I look at it as more of from a leadership standpoint. It's not so much. You got to be careful about like friend type of thing, and it's I wouldn't say that, but I would say just fierce dedication in terms of a responsibility for them and for their lives.
So you're trying to perform CPR on him. But you're bleeding out of your femoral artery and your thigh at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, I didn't know.
You thought the blood
As
was
this,
his that was spurting everywhere? Was that, I mean, it couldn't have been a clean air. Like, how did you not know? I don't, I don't understand this.
because imagine again, I go back to kind of if you're stung by a bee, that initial instant in time where
Hmm.
you that quick reaction. Imagine that quick reaction is drawn out over 15 seconds.
Okay.
It's an altered state of consciousness, literally. Things go into slow motion and fast motion. The body shuts down everything that it does not need to survive the situation. So that means pain's not important. And it's not just survival, it's about what is most important to move through the situation, right? And one thing that I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful the way that I responded, because it wasn't like I chose to do this. How you kind of shape how we react in those moments is through
Hmm.
extensive training leading up to it and extensive debriefing afterwards. But once that autonomic response goes down, like getting shot, it's kind of you're along for the ride.
Hmm.
And so with a blown out femoral artery, I mean, this just shows the power of the body and what the body sensed was important, which was my life wasn't as important as saving that of my
Marlon.
team member,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't like I was consciously thinking of that. It's just that's who we are, right? That's who we are in the first responder and military professions. If there's any proof of that, it's happens anyway.
It's
It
selflessness.
was so yeah. When I was initially on the ground doing that, right, and saw the sepsis wound, my medic arrived just a second or two later. He was already on the way. 19 years old,
Oh my
right?
God. And how old are you at this
And
point? You're 26,
I was 23, I think.
23. Oh my
20,
goodness.
well, probably 24,
Okay.
25, 25 maybe. Yeah, something like that. I
It's
forget.
2007.
Yeah, I don't even remember how old I think I'm like, I don't know. I don't, it depends on if you
Age
count.
is irrelevant when when you've died.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of have two birthdays if you count
Yeah.
like when I got brought back to life. Um, so yeah, my medic got there,
So all of
19
19, your
years
medic
old.
arrives. Oh my goodness. And has to make a
Yep.
choice.
And he's got to make it. So this is a really interesting situation, like for right now with COVID-19, and our emergency medical professionals. Uh, you know, uh, a lot of the work that I do is on moral trauma and
Mm.
psychological trauma, but a huge component of that is moral trauma. This is shame, guilt, powerlessness, betrayal. It includes both inner directed moral emotions, such as I could have, should have, or would have done something differently or better to prevent something bad from happening. Or a lot of what we're seeing right now is also other directed
Mm.
moral trauma, such as our political leaders are failing us. I'm angry at this, or right, or at a variety of different things. This is obviously a very complex and very confusing time for a lot of people. But to kind of just focus on our emergency medical professionals for a moment, one of the kind of determinants or situations that can produce moral trauma is what's called an irresolvable moral dilemma, a situation in which, regardless of the choice taken, each choice results in a negative outcome, right? So regardless of who he chose to save, one of us was going to die.
Yes.
It's kind of like the physician or nurse, who gets the ventilator if there's only one
Yes.
and two patients are in urgent need of it.
Yes.
That's an irresolvable moral dilemma.
And one you can't you can't just forget about it when you go home that day.
Yeah, and look, the medic did absolutely everything perfectly correct. I mean, it couldn't have been any better what he did. So logically, right? He triaged. He did exactly what he was trained for, and he's good today, right? I'm using this as an example of a potential situation that can cause it, because it still brings up these deep existential questions about,
Yes.
and I think as we age and as we grow older and our perspective shifts, we constantly have to derive new meaning and reorient ourselves to our past experiences, like especially things that profound.
Mm-hmm.
because as time moves forward, you're like, look, when 9/11 happened, I mean, I don't think I've ever felt more patriotic, right, than in the beginning years of that situation, right? It was this country coming together like we've never seen before,
Sure,
and
yeah.
everything felt just and right, and that obviously like got very confusing years later, and there's either way, there's things that these types of life situations bring up when we really are dealing with life and death that really challenge our internal beliefs about ourselves and the world.
So he's 19. He comes rushing to you. He pulls you off of Marlin. Then talk to us about the next state that your body starts to go into.
So when the medic got there, that's the point where I think probably due to acute blood loss, like again, I didn't know it was wrong until I actually got brought back to life, and like, you know what I mean? Like, because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I just knew something was wrong. But yeah, I kind of, when the medic got there, he grabbed me and he said, "Sir, who's the second casualty?" Because apparently on the radio I was calling up, "We have 2 casualties," but I didn't specify that I was the second casualty because I could barely speak. And when I was on the ground working on Marlin, I was kind of on a knee, and it happened to be the knee that was shot, right? So the blood was spurting the opposite way of the medic, and the opposite way of what I could see. It was out of our field of vision. So when the medic got there, he goes, "Who's the second casualty?" And I just said, "I am." And then boom, and kind of fell into a different dimension of world. It was an altered state of consciousness, different from the autonomic response. I think that I was on the way to dying right there. No physical pain whatsoever. I just at that point kind of went into this state of subconsciousness and started to fall into a deeper and deeper sleep. It was very comfortable. It was like my mom tucking me into bed. That's what I felt like, right? And what happened next is I felt myself being dragged along the desert floor, and it's kind of like this rocky, hard-packed desert where we were, right? So you kind of hear this, and that's all I could really hear, which is interesting because you notice, like, within this, like, literally just a few seconds prior, I was the one doing the dragging, and now I'm the one being drugged. It's just kind of an interesting juxtaposition there, right? But as my team was dragging me, I just deeper and deeper sleep, and I think I was checking out right there. But that's when something very significant happened, and that was I suddenly heard one of my team members who was dragging me just yell at the top of his lungs. He's like, "Come on, sir, stay awake." And despite the condition that I was in, I could hear his voice like just reverberating through my entire body, right? I could hear the pain in his voice, the emotional pain. And it was kind of like this awareness that this injury wasn't about me. It was about the whole team, right? Everyone involved in this. And I realized that, like, regardless of the condition I was in, I was still the leader of this unit. And I still had a responsibility to do whatever I could to help all of us through this situation. And it was really the power of that moment that snapped me back to full consciousness as they were dragging me into the medevac vehicle. And that's really where the fight for my life began. So
did his calling out to you give you almost like a rope to pull yourself out of wherever you were? Was there like a physical representation of what that feeling was? We watch TV and movies all the time, and you see people like, "Don't leave me," and they're shaking the person who's dying. And I've always wondered, like, do they hear that? Does that pull you into a different consciousness state where you're in a place where your brain starts pumping whatever it is that your body needs to start doing what it needs to get better, to get stronger, to find a different plane? What does that that responsibility that you suddenly feel to all these young men that are in your, or men and women that are in your unit. What is the physical representation of that?
It's a really good question. So I'm going to go abstract here. I hope not too abstract, but these are kind of some really recent insights because I've been slowing this entire experience down to the millisecond and analyzing it kind of through the lens of consciousness theory and stuff. And one thing that I see is there's kind of a variety of different things that are going on at the same time. But one way you can analyze this is actually through the lens of love. And sort of a what I would call kind of a reduction, right? That meaning as I approach the point of death, between this moment and kind of when I flatlined, probably about 20 minutes later, throughout that time, there's kind of a reduction of what I was capable of being aware of in my consciousness, right? And what I mean is like, so what we're looking at here is what are the human elements, what are the human kind of interactions throughout this process that were significant. The first was sort of that kind of social love, that just the love of friends and colleagues, right? And which is represented by my team members. And it was that specific point where, there's something that tethers us to this world. Like, and there's one of the most commonly reported things during near-death experiences is kind of like this narrowing, this acceleration, a tunnel, right? And I absolutely experienced that towards the end. But it was almost like this hand reaching down and grabbing you right before you slip away, and kind of pulling you back into this world. But it was literally a surge of love. I don't think that there's anything more powerful than that. Later we'll kind of see the familial love emerge with the thoughts about my mother and sisters, which immediately preceded the point of dying, and then kind of a more divine, all-inclusive love that was really the final transition, right? So
do you think had that team member not called out for you, you would have been gone?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I do. Cause there's something that like, I mean, look, when you get hit in the femoral, it's not a good situation, right? You have less than 2 minutes to live.
It's not a good situation. Maybe the understatement of this entire episode.
It's not a good situation, right? So you've got like 2 minutes left to live. So roughly speaking, at least 30 seconds went by before, 30 seconds to a minute probably went by, let's say safely, before the tourniquet went on, the first tourniquet. Again, one of the most difficult places to put a tourniquet on is in the upper thigh, because it's just it's difficult. So again, the medic was all over this. I think he put 2 tourniquets on. But so I don't know. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought.
That's okay. This is a heavy moment. So there's the love that you feel, the sort of community, friendship, responsibility, and then they're working on you. They're administering drugs. They're doing CPR, jolts, defibrillator, the whole thing, and it's not working. And you begin to think about your mother and your sisters.
Well, so let's go back just for a minute. So I get transported to the base. This is another reason why I'm alive. I was fortunate to literally be in Iraq instead of Afghanistan. If I was in Vietnam, I would not have survived this. If I was in Afghanistan, I probably wouldn't have survived this, just because the chances of us being more remote would have been higher. One of the things that helped us here is we were 10 minutes away from this aid station with an exceptional medical team, whom I never met before until this day. And that's kind of so when I was being transported there, it took about 10 minutes, right? They were just flying. And during that transport, right, that's when it started to get kind of difficult, right? It felt like giving blood over and over and over again, just that kind of queasy feeling, except magnified. And my only goal was to stay conscious, right? Make it to the aid station, medic being with me there the whole time, just all over it. And when I got to the aid station, right, the ramp on the vehicle drops, and there's this team of like 8 medical professionals, who honestly, like, it was such a privilege for me to be conscious for this, to be able to watch them work. Because even though I was like a couple minutes from death at this point, like, they conducted the most well-rehearsed battle drill I have ever seen in my life. They were well-led. They were well-trained. They worked as a cohesive team. Watching them work was literally like watching a choreographed dance. It was beautiful.
And are you seeing all of this still in slow motion?
This was in basically normal at this point. That altered state of consciousness really only lasted, that part of it, during that first 15-second autonomic window. And then things kind of just got, they stabled out basically until I approached the point of death again. So at this point, I was very conscious about what was happening. I could hear and comprehend everything that the medical team was saying. But the bizarre thing was, they didn't know that. They rightfully thought that I was in complete shock, right? Because my body was behaving as if it was in shock, uncontrollable. Yet my mind was crystal clear. I wanted to listen to them. There was actually a point where I tried to apologize to them, like literally a minute before I died. I was like, ugh, but I couldn't get anything out, right? I couldn't speak. If I tell you the story behind it, it's kind of funny, but lots of dark humor. But anyway, yeah, they were just, look, it gave me, and the medic's performance, my team's performance, and this medical team's performance were all 3 things that just gave me this incredible sense of confidence and comfort, like knowing that I was in the best possible hands, right?
The fact that you said that it was a privilege to watch them work, to be conscious, to see it, just, I mean, that brought tears to my eyes. That is an absolutely incredible statement. Now, were you apologizing because you were wearing contact lenses when you were not supposed to be?
I forgot about that. Yeah. I was worried about getting in trouble. One of my biggest fears after I got brought back to life was I was worried I was going to get in trouble because I had contacts that were still in. So
I remember you
for
telling me
minutes.
that story in Japan, that the first thing you did when you woke up was like, you called for the nurse so you could take your contact lenses out and put glasses on because you thought you were in trouble. You've been dead and you were worried about your contact lenses.
I was worried. This is how the military is, right? You get so, like, everything is a big deal, right? Like, so you get like, oh my God, I'm going to get like an Article 15 for wearing my contacts. It's so stupid, right? Yeah. So I wake up in Germany and I'm like, shit, my contacts are still in. You know, how do I figure this one out? But no. So, but look, you know, despite their best efforts, I could feel myself starting to die. And in catastrophic injuries like this, your body will actually pull blood to the chest cavity to protect the vital organs. So it'll pull it away from the extremities and into the center of the chest. And I could, you know, again, there's no physical pain during this. The only pain that I felt was more of an anaerobic pain, like running sprints and not being able to stop, right? Or pick the hardest workout of your life and just not being able to stop doing that workout. That's kind of what it feels like to die from blood loss. It's not that bad. But
it's not that bad to die from blood loss. Sure, no problem.
But it's yeah. But you know, when that started happening, I knew the injury was getting out of control. Right, the breathing became more shallow, more rapid, and it wasn't exactly comfortable. But as that kind of blood creeping sensation hit my kind of stomach area, that's when, again, we go back to this idea of love. I did not have like this kind of your life flashes before your eyes kind of thing, like we always hear, or what we hear a lot. But I do believe that what was most important to me was revealed in those final moments. And that is, and this is about 60 seconds away from the final transition. And that is my mother and my two sisters, just their names. I just started repeating them over and over and over again. Not consciously, it just happened, right? So again, we kind of see this social love, and then this familial love, and then it kind of, just a few moments later, I consciously know that I'm about to take my last breath, and took my last breath and died. So yeah, that was So I've been doing a lot of reflection on this. You've heard me talk about this before, and I always described it the best way that I could. And what I would typically say is, that moment, right? It wasn't like one of these grand stories or grand out of body experiences of being met by past relatives and passengers and all these just wonderful things happening. And I did not have an out of body experience like that. And I actually, for the better part of 15 years following this, or however long it's been, how long has it been? 13 years?
2007, so 13 years.
Yeah, so 13 years.
You're
so
a
far.
man now. Happy bar mitzvah.
Thanks. Yeah. Yay. It was. Look, it was I did not have this grandiose experience. It did not match up with, people think this experience kind of would bring me closer to a sense of God, and it actually did completely the opposite. Or what I thought was, it really challenged any underlying religious beliefs I had, because this did not match up with anything that I experienced. It was far more powerful. So I actually, and because I didn't match up with all these other near-death accounts that I heard about, I didn't think there was much more to it than saying, it was this phenomenal experience in terms of this revelation of this social love, the family love, and then this feeling in this final transition of being part of everything and nothing. All the good, all the bad, all positive, all negative, everything dissipates, everything goes away. Such an incredibly powerful feeling that, one of our common fears is when I die, I'm kind of worried about my family, right? I'm worried about my kids, or I'm worried about, what's going to happen to them. In this final moment, even that subside. It's not even possible to think about that. It is such an overwhelming feeling of interconnectedness and love that it fundamentally just alters. To be able to come back from that, it's pretty powerful to be able to experience something like that, right? And part of what I've really been diving into in grad school, especially this last year, has been really revisiting this experience. And when you dig into it through the lens of consciousness and science, right? And integrating a lot of these different concepts, Laura, I cannot believe what is coming out of this. I used to say it faded to black, and that was kind of it, right? This incredible feeling of interconnectedness, and then kind of faded to black. It wasn't just that, right? It was that I didn't have the words to articulate it. And it's this art of articulation in our lives, of being able to stick with these experiences enough until we can find a way to express it and articulate it in a way that really helps bring through a lot of meaning. So one part of that meaning is, for me, is as I really look at this idea of death, one thing that I will say definitively is that there is no sense whatsoever of finality in death. We fade into death just like we fade into life. And what I mean is, like, do you remember exactly when you were born?
No, of course not. Right.
Right. So our consciousness just kind of flickers, as as philosopher Alfred North Whitehead would say, consciousness flickers into existence. Right. Same with death. It's there was a, like, and I'm not even getting into anything theological at this point, right? But all I'm trying to recognize is, like, the most grounded truth of this experience that I can express, regardless of what anyone's spiritual or non-spiritual beliefs are, is there's something about rhythm here. There's something about just this non-perception, just not having a perception of finality, I think, is a very significant thing. It's a very long discussion, right? But anyway, so I wake up. So get this. Here's kind of the inspirational part. So what happens next, right? So I die, and here's kind of what I mean. Also about interconnectedness. I'm not responsible for being alive today. The medical team is, right? Mm-hmm. When I was checked out, they were the ones that were frantically working on me. They were the ones. So, I mean, get this. This was a very rudimentary treatment facility with very basic life-saving equipment, but with a stellar medical team. And I hope that this part of the story here, like, really speaks to our professionals right now in this crisis of COVID. This is what they do. But a lot of strange things happened that day. The defibrillator paddles that they used to shock me back to life literally arrived at the base that very morning.
Oh my goodness.
They had to take them out of the plastic to use them on me. And because there was they were basically working on me on top of a cot. And because of a mechanical failure of the cot, they were unable to lower it to the proper height to get the leverage necessary to do CPR. And it just so happened that the one person who could reach just happened to be this former football lineman, right? He was a private first class named Tipton, who probably weighed a good 250, right? Right. So it was Tipton, and Tipton alone, who did CPR on a live victim for 15 minutes straight. Which
is what, 7-8 minutes past when they're supposed to call time of death.
Yeah, it's at least double. Usually, like, I mean, they're kind of the ethically acceptable, I guess you could say, or reasonable thing to do is to call it after about 6 minutes. The reason for that is because that's the point usually when catastrophic brain damage sets in, irreparable brain damage, right? So they kind of tend to call it sometimes around the 6-minute mark. However, there is this golden hour today with advancing medical technology. You're seeing people code for an hour today. And they're like, some dude just got knocked off by a shark, and he like in South Africa, I heard, and he like died for almost an hour, apparently. So
it's like your little club, your ghost club you've got there.
Yeah, we've got this crazy club, right? But yeah. Anyway, this just if you've never done CPR before or on a mannequin, even, like,
exhausting. It's
exhausting, right? So this dude was pouring sweat the whole time, and he was doing it standing on top of a crate. So they get this faint pulse back against all odds. They rush me out to the landing zone, right? The Blackhawks already came in. They were, running hot, just waiting, right? And as the medical team was rushing me out, they encountered my scout platoon, who was now led by a young staff sergeant who took over, right? And that scout platoon stopped the medical team and said, "He's our lieutenant. We're putting him on that bird." And through that, they took the stretcher from the medical team. They loaded me on the Blackhawk. And I think through that, they took back control over a situation that was stolen from them by an enemy sniper just a few seconds prior. Agency, the ability to do something about it. Agency is a really important, I think, mechanism of resilience in these traumatic moments, right? So anyway, Blackhawks rushed to the green zone. The vascular surgeon and team there conducted a perfect vascular surgery the first time out the gate, administering nearly 30 units of blood to save my life.
Oh my goodness.
Your body doesn't hold that much. So I just kept bleeding it out, apparently. And because there was a blood shortage at the time, they actually were taking doing direct transfusions, pulling people off the base, straight out of them, straight into me.
Well, it's already warm, so you're all set.
Yeah, right. So the point is that every step of that medical evacuation process, from that 19-year-old medic on the ground to the nurse back at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, was absolutely flawless. And I'm only alive today thanks to an ecosystem of people, all of whom chose to do one more thing, right, in the face of extreme adversity. And so yeah, for that, very, very grateful. Long story short, I ended up recovering at Walter Reed for the next 4 months or so, and then I redeployed back to Baghdad.
You had to
What's that?
learn how to walk again.
Yeah, I had to figure that out, and then I went back to Baghdad. So yeah, that which just to kind of probably worth just kind of capping that part of the story there. There's so much behind it, but it was amazing to, look, again, a lot of the work I do is on moral trauma and guilt and shame, and that can come in very interesting forms. And one of the most difficult feelings is to be in a position of safety when people that you care deeply about and even are responsible for, right, as a leader, are in danger. It doesn't matter if there's a giant hole in your leg and you just die. Like, it doesn't matter. There's like a triple amputee laying in the room next to me, right? And he's like, when can I go back? And that's what I asked too, like the doctors, it just doesn't matter. Like, get me back. Just the fact of being there is that's just kind of in the ethos of military and first responder professions. It's just sort of who we are. But there's a powerful sense of guilt underlying that too, right? Survivor's guilt. There's in that Marlon died and I lived, and that was obviously that's sort of the other part of this. It's like, yes, I woke up in the green zone 2 days later after this injury to learn that I flatlined for 15 minutes. And I also learned that while I lived, Marlon Harper did not, which was kind of expected. So, I'll just, if I can, I'll just share this with you really quickly.
Yes.
Not a whole lot of people. I think I mentioned a little bit of it in my book, but it wasn't this far developed back then when I published. And I think it really actually is important based on a lot of the messaging coming out of the convention last night, which is heavily involved in dignity. Like, you can't make this stuff up in terms of the timing, but so, I survivor's guilt is very difficult. When getting killed yourself is one thing. It's a lot harder, I think, when you live and other people don't, and it just doesn't. There's a lot of very complex feelings involved in that, right? And you and I've spoken enough that you kind of know that I'm a pretty deep humanist. I'm an infantry guy, but I'm also a humanist, and it's sort of like this counterinsurgency environment was all hearts and minds, trust building. And what I didn't tell you is what happened right before we got shot. I said it, but I'll just point out a different detail right now. Like, so in one sense, first, I noticed that when Marlon was conducting that test, I noticed that he was exposed to Solder City, which is our biggest threat, right? Sniper threat. And I was like, hey, Marlon, you might want to bump over to the other side of the truck. Looks like you're open. Now, look, I'm a rookie lieutenant. Marlon was a 6-time deployed staff sergeant, right? He was our senior scout. He was the guy. He was the rock of this whole unit. Great person. So yeah, he looks up and he's like, oh, good call, sir, right? He bumps over, and I walked him right into the sight picture of that sniper. Takes a couple steps, so test dead. By way of hindsight bias and responsibility, it's like there's shades of responsibility there that are just real. Like, I don't deny them. Like, yes, I'm a leader. I saw that. Couldn't have prevented that. So it's not like things like that happen in combat. So it's not like that specific facet of it bothered me that much. Like, I never really blamed myself in that sense, right? But there's always something deeper about this situation that I couldn't pin down until recently. And it's actually all the events that have been going on lately that sort of pushed me to come to this, right? And one thing for me is, like, I started to have a very hard time, like, questioning, was I too much of a humanist in that environment? And what I mean is, like, we had every reason and right to detain that driver right then and there, pull him in for questioning. Nothing bad would have happened, right? He gets pulled in for questioning, and if he's innocent, we just drop him back off. We would do that all the time, right? Not a huge deal. And again, second, didn't have to do the camera check and the X-ray test, but did it anyway. And had we just detained this guy, it's very possible that sniper may have never got a shot off, right? That we never would have been fixed in place. So I realized I was asking the wrong question the whole time. And the question I was asking didn't just apply to this patrol, right? But it applied to the entire deployment that we were in and in our unit, right? And it's this question of, was I too much of a humanist? Was I too nice? Should I have been a little harder, right? Did I allow ourselves to get run over, essentially? And you know, the word that I was, so it's like, what was it? What was it that drove us to take these risks when we could have just detained this person but didn't want to? Why didn't we want to? And that's the question I had to ask. And the word that I was looking for, Laura, it's dignity. It's dignity. If I would have just rolled that driver up based on, well, you're within the vicinity, you're 2 blocks away, sucks to be you, let's go. We're going to put a hood over your head. Mm-hmm. We're going to cuff you, right? Nothing's going to happen to you. Don't worry about it, right? But you can't speak our language, right? You don't know our culture. Like, can you imagine if some foreign military force, like, came in and detained you and put a hood over your head? And, like, I mean, it's a very dehumanizing thing, right? And if you're there to give people freedom, right, you've got to live it. And part of that sacrifice is being willing to take those risks in order to allow people to have their dignity, right? So that they can have the right to not be detained on a whim, right? That we are willing to take that extra 30 seconds to do an explosives test, even if it does put us at a greater tactical risk, a much greater tactical risk. You know, I say I never fired my weapon personally. That's not that uncommon in this environment. It's the nature of the environment. It's subversive. It's in the shadows. We never see the enemy, right? We're getting sniped and killed and blown up, and you've got to maintain your composure and still be that symbol, right, of that can potentially allow these people to have their dignity when no one else ever allowed them to have it before. It may be the first time they've ever experienced that kind of thing. So look, I certainly can't speak for Marlon Harper himself, and I certainly can't speak for his widow and kids that were left behind. But I can say that Marlon was absolutely the type of person who would put his life on the line, and did, and indeed gave his life to protect the dignity of a person that he didn't even know.
So it's such an interesting concept because you and I have had long, drunken, all-night conversations about this topic, about the idea of leadership, and we never used the word dignity, but we did talk about seeing people, humanity. I remember you telling me, I came out to San Francisco, I think you'll remember, right before you were about to give a talk at the Presidio for Memorial Day, Veterans Day. I can't remember. I think it was for Veterans Day.
Yeah,
Memorial Day.
That.
Okay. And you rehearsed your talk for me. And in your talk, you were going to say something. You were going to just list off the kinds of people who served. And you were going to talk about LGBTQ people serving. And I was like, whoa. And I said, you're really going to do that? And you said, it's the first time anyone will have said that at the Presidio in a Memorial Day commemoration. And I remember in that moment thinking, this is a man who believes in his country, who believes in service. And the word dignity didn't come to my mind, but that was what you were looking for right there.
Yeah.
So there's this pattern that you have of humanity and dignity and service and leadership and country before self. And we're at this moment in our country's leadership where we're lazy. We're almost going to like shortcuts. Like, this person looks like that, so they must be like this. We're willing to put people in cages. We're willing to strip humanity from individuals for political gain. And this must make you insane.
Yeah. I mean, look,
And I'm
when
not
you
trying to be
really look at
political.
what's
I think
going
it's on
on.
both sides. I think there are people on both sides who are selfish and party first and country second. I mean, clearly we all know I have certain political leanings, but I think it happens everywhere in our politics.
It happens everywhere and kind of on the extreme end of the spectrum. But this is such an just unprecedented time where you almost see these just two radically opposite, the most radical possible opposites, right, are emerging here of, and you see it in the Democratic Convention. Like, this was like, we're just going to lean into this and do it the most radical possible way, like radical empathy and humility versus radical arrogance and pride. Look, I'm not one to ever like really speak out on this stuff, but now I'm like at a point now where I seriously think I don't think there's anything more important to be talking about right now than this. And the situations like on the border, for example, separating families, putting them in cages, like aside from the impact that obviously has on the people themselves, right? The moral trauma to those Border Patrol agents, that's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Right. He has put his own people in a position. Where I really struggle with this is because it appears on paper, right, policy wise, that President Trump is very pro-cop, pro-police, right, pro-military, throws a lot of money at it, right, lots of money at it. Yet I see at the same time, right, we're watching the riots break out in front of the White House. It was that night that I texted you.
Yes.
Because I couldn't believe what he said. And he incites the riot after his Secret Service agents were getting in possibly the most intense situation that I've seen in a long time, right? I'm here like feeling like an idiot because I can only watch it on TV. I'm like powerless. And I'm seeing like literally this is like possibly the beginning of World War III. All it would take is a shot on either side.
Yeah.
And the line is literally being held right in front of the White House. It's happening, right?
And he's putting his people in that situation where they have to make a choice.
And that's what I ultimately came to, right? Is for all the crap on that's been going on, right? Look, I work with thousands of police. I mean, I just did a thing with New York PD peer support, and I can tell you, like, there's like the police that I know, right? They want change too, right? And they've been pushing this for a very long time, and they're exceptional people who take tremendous risks, as we've been describing. And it's really just, I think our police are being treated like our Vietnam veterans were treated.
Yes.
There's no difference, and I'd encourage people to really think about that. So I'm not speaking about it from this point, but I really had to. Where I really think about this, Laura, is he's not pro-cop. Trump is not pro-cop. He uses his people as pawns. He uses his police as pawns, and he's using his military folks as pawns. And that was evidenced over and over and over again. And another thing you'll see, and I'm not bringing this up because it like hurt my feelings, but if you notice during his commencement address at West Point recently, he talked about every decisive war in our nation's history that had a decisive victory, right? The George Patton era wars, World War II,
Yes.
Right? He refused to acknowledge 9/11, didn't even mention it. And he did not acknowledge Iraq or Afghanistan, nothing about the war on terrorism, just referred to them as endless wars, right? Well, you know what? Look, all the progress we made over the last 20 years of transforming our military into the most ethical force you can imagine. I mean, working in these complex, urban, dense environments, the world is different. It's not World War II anymore.
Right.
We don't need decisive victories, nor do we want it, right? This is like, we are an increasingly globally connected society that is unavoidable with technology, and things are changing very fast. These decisive victories and isolating us on some kind of an island, I think it is the most dangerous and destructive thing. This is the kind of stuff that leads to like just this insane polarity we saw, or not saw, but just hear about, right? And like, we wonder, how could an entire country get behind someone like Adolf Hitler? How could an entire country get pulled into something so horrendous? This is how it happens. It happens slowly, like what we're seeing right now, you know? And before you know it, we're pulled into this type of situation that we couldn't even predict if this continues, right? So I really am. I think a lot of people are truly concerned, and you know, so I just look. There's so much more I could get into about intricacies of you know, not only that deployment, but just other things, and look, we made so much progress in transforming our military and in adapting to a much more complex urban environment, a more complex moral terrain, right? Where there's more people, the moral terrain is more complex, right?
Yes.
And I think that pushes us, honestly, to be better. So a lot of people say that, you know, these were endless wars. Okay, so perhaps we shouldn't have got involved, but like, to bail on people after we've been supporting them for so long, like, I guarantee you, like, I don't mind going over there and doing what we do, right? I do mind if one of the hardest things to deal with coming back from those deployments is that you never really see the results of your work. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yes.
Yes. It is, they're human beings, you know, and nobody more than the soldier, face-to-face conversation with the people in the areas where they're serving. Like, you build just as strong relationships and bonds. Sometimes they take just as much risks. My interpreter was executed, drive-by shooting, right? Just for working with us. We saw that all the time. You know, I saw so many, like, just Iraqi people sacrifice their lives for their own country. We never hear about that, right? Mm-hmm. So those coalition partners of ours, like, they are truly, like, in my opinion, like, they are truly our partners, right? You get very close with them, and to kind of, it's just kind of like the Border Patrol thing, to pull people away from stuff like that and sever those relationships. That is a human function that it's you, like, try doing it on paper, great, but there's going to be serious or can be very serious emotional consequences to whoever was involved in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the emotional, the psychological, the economical tail on that is outrageously long, and all those policies on paper do absolutely nothing to account for any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's terrifying. Well, I could talk to you for hours about this, but I try to keep these shows to an hour, and here we are. I do. Wow, it's funny. Already. I remember that night in San Francisco. I'm like, you should run for office, and you were like, what? I've never thought about politics. I don't even know what party I'm in. And I was like, how do you feel about gay marriage? How do you feel about this? I just started going through, like, issue area, and at the end I was like, I've got news for you, my friend. You're a Democrat. And you were like, really? I remember that. You were sort of stunned because you just never thought about it.
I've never been, I mean, I'll admit, and I would probably venture to say a lot of people are in the same boat. I have never been more politically engaged than I am right now. And I really do hope that people, no joke, vote this election like there's something much bigger that feels like is happening here with this. And I mean, look, Biden hit it last night. Like, by the way, I thought his speech was actually really good. We're hitting 4 major crises at the same time, right? We've got tornadoes and fires and hurricanes and pandemics and riots and the economy collapsing, right? This is a global trauma. This is a national trauma. Things are changing, and I think that just the polarity here, you really have to think about. Michelle Obama, just the way that she said it, right? Who do we want to be?
Who do we want to be when we wake up in the morning? Who do we want to be? And I think a lot of us think about that. And there's the who do we want to be publicly, right? The face we put out there. And then there's the who do we want to be privately. And I think that we saw that in this last election, 2016. People were like, yay, a woman in office, but not that woman in private, right? Like there was a lot of that went on. And I really worry that there is a segment of the population who has done better because of Trump, or who is happy that he hates the same people they hate. And in private, they're willing to express that. But I do think this argument that this is an election where we're going to decide the soul of our nation is not overblown. I think that
it's not. I do not. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like this is not some corny tagline that the Democratic Party came up with. I think it's absolutely real. Like this is an election literally for the soul of our country. It's pride versus humility. And look, I've been very, I think many of us have been like just deeply conflicted in so many ways. And I certainly have been, and experiencing a lot of very, very complex emotions. But I'll tell you what, when I really sit down and analyze, like, who am I? Like, well, I'll tell you, one of the candidates stands against everything that I stand for, everything, right? And the other, it supports and really represents everything that I do stand for, right? I don't believe I'm bailing on our partners. It's too much to get into, and I know we're winding down here, but I really, I learned a lot about myself since we had that conversation in San Francisco. And, also in grad school, in a very liberal school, and intentionally kind of opening myself up to the thought, questioning everything I knew about myself, right? And I lost myself. Like, it was the hardest year and a half of my life, was the last year and a half, for a number of reasons. But through this, maybe this is a good way to close here, right? Is that we can always, there's always beauty within darkness, if we're willing to look for it, right? That these moments of great adversity can really teach us a lot about who we are, and can lead to a lot of self-discovery and rediscovery. So, I know it's a very ambiguous time for people, and it's a challenging time, but I know we're gonna come out of this on the other side.
There is always beauty in darkness if you look hard enough for it. So, as you know, my son is desperate to join the military. He wants to be an astronaut. He's applying to the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy. He's going to apply for ROTC if he goes to civilian college. And it terrifies the fuck out of me. But knowing that there are people like you in the service gives me the most incredible amount of calm you can possibly imagine. I say to him, are you sure? Because I don't always know if the military does the most ethical thing. But he's like, if you want to have an ethical military, you need ethical people to join it. And I think about you every time he says that to me.
Yeah. And this is, it's another thing why I don't want to see the progress that we made over the last 20 years be reversed.
Yes. By
some kind of, retrograde to World War II style decisive victory. We're the best. Nothing else matters.
Yes.
Like, and I'll tell you this, like, it's easy to do that, Laura. I mean, look, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that World War II is easy. What I'm saying is, in comparison to these complex urban environments, it is it is at least morally easier to go in to do a decisive victory, to not make face-to-face eye contact with people, right? To go in and impose your own way. I can plan that operation. There's people much better than me that can plan complex military operations, coordinate joint support, do all the stuff that's needed to do tactically. In Iraq and Afghanistan, much of that, especially Iraq, much of that went out the window. And suddenly we were in this complex human terrain, right? This is where General Petraeus comes in and really starts to drive those policies from the top down. Mattis comes in, right? There has been so much tremendous change that our military has gone through, right? And this, by the way, this environment that our military folks have been in is very similar to the risks that our law enforcement professionals take every day.
Yes.
They're going out on the streets on their own.
Yes.
We have a team of 20 people with us, but it is this, we've learned so much and we lost so many people, that to reverse all that progress out of pride, pride is among, I think, the most dangerous emotions out there, the most dangerous things out there. What I'm saying is I think that these environments actually make us better, right? They challenge us, but at the same time, they expose us to a level of complexity that's so great that it gives us this broad life perspective. And that's kind of what I'm doing, is helping people process that and put it together. But, I just can't. Look, if you've ever looked at a human being in the eyes, like the people of Iraq are no different than the people of the United States. I mean, I could share some stories with you about that we obviously don't have time to do, but that are kind of go deeper into that story about Hajjal, that 14-year-old girl, and some other folks. But, look, it's an increasingly global society. We are going through unprecedented levels of change, technological growth. Like, we need to be ready to adapt and change, right?
Yes.
And come together here. So, looking forward to doing what I can.
Yeah, well, I encourage people, if they want to hear more about your story, to pick up your book, The Beauty of a Darker Soul, which is, I know, a few years ago, and you've been working on other great stuff since. So they can pick up The Beauty of a Darker Soul. And where can they find you?
Just go to phaedrusfactory.com, PHAEDRUS, phaedrusfactory.com. That's the best place to hit me up.
Okay, so before we leave, who is Phaedrus?
Phaedrus is actually a book that Plato wrote.
What is Phaedrus?
It's both the book where Plato outlines his conception of love, which kind of relates to the story we were talking to earlier about the different forms of love. And it's also, and you'll appreciate this is where Plato speaks about the art of oration, the art of communication, right? The art of articulation, and how vital it is that we keep developing the artistry, right, of our craft as communicators, speakers, etc. Phaedrus, it kind of is it, and it's also the place where Plato said, or Socrates says, that all the greatest blessings come by way of madness. So, like, creative madness.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So you're going to keep creating your oration of love in your moments of madness in your Phaedrus factory. I love it. It's perfect.
Sounds like me, right?
Sounds exactly like you. Josh, thank you so much. Thank you for letting us into your life, into your death, into your second life again. I appreciate you being willing to go there. And I appreciate you and your service and all that you represent in this world.
Hey, likewise to you, Laura. It was great to hear from you as always, and I'll keep you posted on where I land. Probably, awesome. Yeah. So we'll have to catch up separately later.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon, Mr. President.
Yeah, right. All right. Take care. Bye.